everyone. Today we will be discussing neurons and neuron synapse.
How do cells communicate with each other? Cells communicate with each other through synapses. They use two different types of synapses, electrical synapses and chemical synapses. On the image on the right, you see side A, which is chemical synapses. These synapses change the plasma membrane to allow the release of neurotransmitters. Chemical synapses rely on the neurotransmitters to receive information. In the image, you see the chemical transmission through neurotransmitters, which is what is circled. And on side B, we see electrical synapses. Electrical synapses have gaps or channels that let electricity flow directly to each neuron. In image B, you can see the electrical transmission done through junction channels. Cell communication over short and long distancing. Both long and short distance communication involves chemical signals. Short distance cells can send signals to other short cells as long as they are nearby. The neurotransmitter allow for only short distance communication. On the top image, we can see an example of a cell targeting a nearby cell. Long distance cells rely on the nervous system and through axons of neurons. The release of chemical signals acts solely on distant target cells in the body.
There are 6 major components that go into a synapse. The presynaptic neuron contains vesicles that hold neurotransmitters. They have calcium voltage channels on its side and contain docking proteins for vesicles. The synaptic cleft is a space or gap between the presynaptic and postsynaptic neurons. This is where the neurotransmitters fall through. The postsynaptic neuron contains receptors that catch neurotransmitters. An axon is where electrical impulses from the neuron travel away to be received by other neurons. An action potential is neuron's membrane potential caused by ions suddenly flowing in and out of a neuron. And lastly, a neuron has 3 different types of channels. The first is the leak channel for sodium and potassium, which establishes its resting potential. Voltage-gated channels are the transmission of action potentials. Chemically gated channels called receptors are able to connect to neurotransmitters. When done so, they'll open up in order to move us toward or away from action potentials. Next slide. Chemical synapse has a total of 4 steps. 1. Information moves down an axon, also known as a neuron, causing the calcium voltage-gated channels in magenta to open. 2. Calcium, which is a neurotransmitter in this scenario, enters the cell into the vesicles, the larger cells in the diagram. 3 is not displayed, however you can see the aftermath. The synaptic vesicles activate protein located at the surface, causing the vesicles to merge and release its neurotransmitters. 4th, the neurotransmitters interact with receptors, the green chemically gated channels on the other side. Neurotransmitters are then broken apart or recycled back into synaptic vesicles they were previously in. Next slide, please.
How does the environment elicit a cellular response? So first I'm going to go over the components involved in the process leading to a response. Receptors are cell groupings that detect environmental changes and respond with electrical impulses. The central nervous system receives information from receptors via neurons. There are 3 main types of neurons: sensory, motor, and relay. Sensory neurons are nerve cells that are stimulated by environmental sensory information. Sensory neurons are found in sense organs. Like the table shows, skin responds to touch, temperature, and pain stimulus. The tongue responds to chemical stimuli from food and drinks. The nose responds to chemical stimuli in the air, the eyes respond to light stimuli, and the ears respond to sound stimuli. Motor neurons are found in the central nervous system, which connect to muscles, glands, and organs throughout the body. All of our muscular movements are controlled directly by these neurons, which transfer impulses from the spinal cord to skeletal and smooth muscles. Sensory neurons and motor neurons are connected by relay neurons. The process begins with the nervous system detecting changes in our surroundings via receptor cells. A signal is sent to sensory neurons, which transmit information from sensory receptors to the central nervous system. Relay neurons transmit information within the CNS as part of the decision-making process. Motor neurons transmit information from the CNS to effectors, which are the muscles or glands, in order to initiate a response. In this image, the skin organ detects pain when the hand touches the cactus. The signal of pain is sent to the central nervous system through sensory neurons. The relay neurons in the central nervous system then send a message to the motor neurons, which send a signal to the muscle of the arm to move their hand from the cactus, which is the effector. How does change in the structure of a signaling molecule affect the signaling pathway? So to understand how the changes in structure affect the response of neurons, we will apply this concept to medications. Psychoactive medications can either act as agonist or antagonist for a certain neurotransmitter system, depending on their structure. Agonists are substances that imitate a neurotransmitter at the receptor site and as a result enhance the action of the neurotransmitter. An antagonist, on the other hand, is a neurotransmitter that interferes with or prevents the normal activation of a neurotransmitter at its receptor.
Low levels of dopamine, for example, are linked to Parkinson's disease, a degenerative nervous system condition. As a result, one therapy option is to use dopamine agonists, which imitate the effects of dopamine by attaching to dopamine receptors. Another example is schizophrenia, where hyperactive dopamine neurotransmission is linked to certain symptoms. The antipsychotics used to treat these symptoms are dopamine antagonists, meaning they attach to dopamine receptors without activating them, thereby blocking dopamine's effects. As a result, they stop dopamine released by one neuron from transmitting information to neighboring neurons. Neurotransmitters play an important role when it comes to how the neuron responds. Changing it can cause it to become more or less responsive and allow it to make more or less of what it needs. The results affect one's memory and the way it learns. Memory is formed from neural pathways in the brain. Therefore, the type of neurotransmitter ultimately can affect your short-term and long-term memory. The positive mechanism would be excitatory. Here, the neurotransmitters would be pushing us towards the threshold known as action potential. The receptors are on the postsynaptic side and allow the flow of sodium, represented as Na in the diagram. The negative mechanism is inhibitory. It pushes away from action potential, and instead of sodium, this time chloride enters the cell.